Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel will be Leslie Weirich with her talk titled 1 Second of Hope. Leslie Weirich has been speaking on the topic of suicide prevention to teens, young adults, parents, and the military for the past 6 years. She often says she didn't choose this work, but this work chose her, with a knock on her door at 2:30 in the morning on September 10th of 2016. She lost her 20-year-old son, Austin, to suicide. By sheer coincidence, this date also happens to be World Suicide Prevention and Awareness Day. Leslie began sharing her story within her local community in 2017, and then in 2018, her story took a turn and gained national attention as a human interest sports story which launched her public speaking career. In 2020, she resigned from her full-time job as a financial recruiter to begin speaking all over the nation. She focuses on youth mental health with an emphasis on young men, student athletes, and the military. In January of 2021, she partnered with Oak Lawn Community Mental Health Center in northern Indiana. As the first suicide prevention specialist, she helped raise over $100,000 to put the Sources of Strength suicide prevention program in several high schools in her community. Over the past 2 years, she has been speaking on Army bases all over the country, and this September will be presenting her talk to the Pentagon and West Point Military Academy. Leslie is certified in youth mental health first aid, QPR, assist, and safe talk. She is also an inspiring comfort certified trainer. She has been a member of the Elkhart County Suicide Prevention Coalition, where she has lived for the past 20 years. Her first keynote talk broke a 5-year fundraising record for the largest nonprofit in the state of Indiana and raised over $249,000 to put licensed clinical therapists in local schools. Last October, Leslie was the keynote speaker for the National Loss Local Outreach of Suicide Survivors Conference. She grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and studied journalism at Indiana University. Her career spans over 30 years in sales and marketing, including the last 10 as an executive recruiter. However, she believes her greatest accomplishment is her work in raising awareness and saving young lives through her public speaking program called Leslie's Hope. In 2016, her family established the Austin Weirich Memorial Scholarship Fund and has given away over $24,000 in college scholarships. She hosts an annual 5K every September to raise money for the fund, which has now been fully invested in the Community Foundation of Elkhart County, where all donations are matched at 25%. You can reach out to Leslie through her website at leslieshope.org. Let's give a warm welcome to Leslie.
Good morning. Making sure you can hear me here. I speak for a living, so I can project my voice pretty well. Well, I want to thank Wabash College and especially the Sphinx Club for inviting me to speak at Chapel Talk this morning. I love starting all my talks with this Native American proverb. And it says, "Tell me the facts and I'll learn. Tell me the truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story, and it'll stay in my heart forever." Because if there's one thing that I've learned over the last 6.5 years from speaking all over the United States now, is that stories are what people remember in a way that they don't statistics. Now, I know you Wabash men love your data. I'm going to give you a little bit of that in this talk this morning. But I've mostly come here to share our story, because our story has deep roots on this beloved campus of Wabash College. Before I get started with our story this morning, I want you to just sit there and think about something. I want to ask you to think back on a moment in your life when you got the news about something and it just stopped you in your tracks. To this day, you can remember where you were when you heard that news, who you were with. Maybe you were eating in a restaurant. Maybe you were hanging out with a brother or a buddy. Maybe you were sitting in class. But it just takes you back. Some of you, I imagine, in here might be remembering the pandemic. Where were you when you heard our world was shutting down in March of 2020? I think a lot of us can remember that. And what happens when you get news like that? You tend to gauge time by it the rest of your life. Was that before COVID shut the world down? Or was that after COVID shut the world down? It's like everything is marked by that event in your life, and you get this new sense of time. Because it stays etched in your brain in a way and in your heart that you'll never forget, but it changes you. It changes you forever. That moment in my life came on September the 10th of 2016, which just so happens to be World Suicide Prevention and Awareness Day. In fact, the last time I was on the campus of Wabash College was just 6 short days after that, which was Friday, September the 16th of 2016. It's definitely one of those days that's etched in my mind and in my heart because it was one of the hardest days of my life and also of my husband's. But you know, as hard as that day was, I somehow knew in my heart when we drove off this campus, I'd be back here one day. So here I am, 7 years later, and you know what they say? That which does not kill us makes us stronger. And Wabash always fights. But if you think Wabash always fights, you need to see how Wabash moms fight who've lost their sons to suicide, and I'm not the only one here this morning. So I have a new title now that my son gave me, a brand new title he gave me 7 years ago, which is called Survivor of Suicide Loss. But before I finish this talk, you're going to understand why that title doesn't work well for me anymore. Next week will mark 7 years since we packed up our son's books, his clothes, and all of his belongings and drove his car off this campus. You see, we went home to celebrate his life because that's the thing about suicide. People only want to talk about how somebody died. We chose to flip that script, and we wanted to talk about how Austin lived and who he was. And so much of who he was, the last 2 years of his life, happened on this campus that he loved more than anything. So let me tell you just a little bit about our son. Austin was probably a lot like some of you in here. It all started off right here in this chapel, freshman orientation, the ringing in ceremony in the fall of 2014. I remember he was sitting right up there. His dad and I were down here. We kept looking back at him, and he was kind of hanging over the balcony with some of his teammates and his roommates, and it was such a hope-filled day. He had worked so hard to get here. His dad and I were really, really proud of him. He was so excited to be at Wabash, and especially for the football season. You see, Austin was probably like a lot of you, a high achiever, overachiever. He left nothing on the table. He was the president of his freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior class at Goshen High School. He ran track and played football all 4 years he was there, and he was voted the scholar athlete in one or both of those sports every year of high school. Austin actually was the Stay in Bounds ambassador, which he would go into the elementary schools and the middle schools and put on his letter jacket and go in there and talk to the young kids about making good choices in life. He was a role model. He even was awarded the Hugh O'Brien Leadership Award, which some of you in here are probably Hobie winners. And you know that's only given to one rising junior. You have to be nominated by your principal. He went on to a leadership conference that he attended at Butler University. And he'd go on to graduate above a perfect 4.0, taking weighted honors his senior year of high school. And he received $26,000 in renewable academic scholarships, which allowed him to come here to Wabash and play football. He was driven, focused. Sound like any of you out there today? Or up there in the balcony? He knew what he wanted to do, and he loved leadership. It's one of the reasons he chose Wabash. He stepped up every chance he had to be a leader. With that same drive and determination, he landed here on the campus of Wabash. He became the president of the Independent Men's Association. Now, Austin had lots of friends in fraternities, but he was kind of an independent thinker, an independent kind of guy. So he represented that part of your student body really well. He was also a member of the War Council. Wabash acts responsibly. In fact, Austin was scheduled to lead the meeting for the War Council on the morning of Monday, September the 12th of 2016. The topic that morning was mental health concerns on campus. But unfortunately, our son Austin never showed up for that meeting. He never showed up because in the early morning hours of Saturday, September the 10th, everything in his life and in ours was about to take a turn. It all started about 2:30 in the morning with someone ringing our doorbell like crazy. Now, I can tell you that's a sound that none of your parents ever want to hear, but especially at 2:30 in the morning. Austin's dad can sleep through almost anything, but not me. I'm a very light sleeper. So as soon as I heard the pounding on our front door and the ringing of my doorbell like my house was on fire, I jumped out of bed as quick as I could, and I said to my husband, "Somebody's at our front door." I was bolting down the front stairs before my husband could even get out of bed. And when I looked through our front window, I could see a police car parked in front of our house. By that time, my husband was standing behind me, and we opened the front door to two police officers on our front porch. The first officer said, "Do you have a son named Austin Weirich who attends Wabash College?" We said, yes, we do. Then came the words that absolutely no parent ever wants to hear. "You with me? You need to call this number because your son has been in an accident." I grabbed that card out of his hand as fast as I could, and I ran back in to find my cell phone. My husband and I were standing in our kitchen when we called the dean here at Wabash, Dean Raiders, and he told us he was so sorry to tell us there had been an accident that evening in Austin's townhouse. He was with his girlfriend, there had been an argument, and he had shot himself. He told us they were transporting him by ambulance to St. Vincent's in Indianapolis, and we needed to get there as quickly as we could. Now, I have seen some really bad thunderstorms in my lifetime, but I have never ever seen rain or lightning or thunder like we had to drive through that night. We had a 3-hour drive ahead of us from where we live, and we were only about a half hour down the road when my cell phone rang. It was the emergency room doctor, and he wanted to know if we were on our way. I told him that we were, and he asked if we could pull over to the side of the road so he could talk to us. He said he was sorry to tell us the ambulance had just arrived with Austin, but there was no pulse. I said, "What do you mean?" It's like my head and my heart couldn't even comprehend the words he was saying. What did he mean there was no pulse? He said, "Mr. and Mrs. Weirich, I'm sorry to tell you your son did not survive the accident, but we still need you to come. Please, please be careful driving through the storm." In that moment, Austin's dad, who was about the most soft-spoken man I've ever known in my life, just cried out to God, "Why, Austin? Why? Oh, why? Oh, why?" We sat there for about 10 minutes in the dark on the side of that road. Finally, we drove on for the next 2.5 hours in silence and shock, except for the rain, which never let up. We pulled into the parking lot at St. Vincent's, and my husband looked over at me and he said, "I just feel like God is even crying with us tonight." And I believe that he was. In so many ways, that memory of that night is like a blur. And in other ways, I can remember every single detail like it happened just yesterday. Even in 3 more days, it's going to be actually 7 years ago that we sat on the side of that dark road So World Suicide Prevention Awareness Day is not just a hashtag on my LinkedIn profile page. It's my life's work. It's what gets me up in the morning every single day and keeps me going. Because here's what I want. I never, ever want any of your parents to ever hear their doorbell ring at 2:30 in the morning. And guess what? It's also how I measure time. Was that before Austin died or after Austin died? But I'm not here today just to tell you the story of losing our son. I'm here to tell you that that was not the end of our story, not even close. Remember, I'm a Wabash mom, so I always fight. As some of you might know, that would not be the last suicide this campus would ever face. On the 2-year anniversary of Austin's death, September 10th of 2018, we would receive a text message that evening from one of his roommates, and this is what it said. Mr. and Mrs. Weirich, I don't know if you heard, but Evan Hansen, the co-captain of the Wabash football team, took his life today. I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, especially today, but I just didn't want you and your husband to hear about it on the news. Now, our grief, which we were still learning how to navigate through, was compounded as we shared it with the Hansen family of Carmel, Indiana. Evan Hansen was only 21 years old and about to graduate with a double major in Spanish and biology. He had just been recognized that Saturday as the co-captain of the team on Senior Saturday. He stood on the field proudly with his mom and dad on both sides. They went out to eat after the game. Evan got up on Sunday morning. He went to practice, saw all his teammates, had a meeting with his coaches. And on Monday morning, Evan walked into the woods and in a split second gave up hope. So now his parents would also be handed a new way to measure time. Was that before Evan died or after Evan died? 2 weeks after Evan's death, we were contacted by a reporter from the Indianapolis Star. She told us that she would be interviewing Chuck and Mary Hansen to talk about Evan's death, and she wanted to know if we would share our part of the story because she thought if both families could share things, that maybe we could help someone else not have to go through what we have. We agreed. My husband and I did the interview with the reporter, and the following week on a Wednesday, the article came out in the Indianapolis Star. By Sunday, your beloved Wabash College made national news as a human interest sports story. Feel free to Google, 2 Wabash football players die by suicide. It's not what you want to be known for. That's why I've come. I want to turn this around. I want you guys to be known as trendsetters in men's mental health. Two weeks later, I'd be contacted by the largest nonprofit in the state of Indiana. They had read the article. They wanted to know if I would come and be their keynote speaker. And I had not done any speaking at that point. And I kind of laughed and I said, I'm not a speaker. I'm not a keynote speaker. I'm a mom who's lost my son to suicide. They said, we know. We read your story. And we want to know if you'd be able to come and share it at our fundraiser. They said, we'll give you a week to think about it, and we'll call you back. I went home and I discussed it with my husband, and he said, you know what, Leslie? He said, ever since Austin died, you've been talking about wanting to get out more and share our story to help other young people, and especially young men. Here's your chance. I think you should do it. In January of 2019, I took the stage for 24 minutes as the keynote speaker for Jazzin' Up January for Crosswinds Counseling. Within an hour of finishing my talk, they broke a 5-year fundraising record, and we raised $249,000 to put licensed clinical therapists in 25 community schools. Something told me Something told me that if our story could move that many people to donate that much money to mental health counseling, then I needed to keep on telling it and telling it and telling it. So here I am, 7 years later, back with you at Chapel Talk. It's the reason I've come back, because once again, I didn't come here just to share the sad part of our story with you this morning. I came here to tell you the rest of our story. I have a good friend. I met her shortly after Austin died. She's a speaker and an author. She had the back-to-back tragedy of losing her 39-year-old husband to a rare form of cancer, and then 2 years later, her 6-year-old son would die after a medical error in a hospital where he was given the wrong medication. She wrote a book about it called The List. She found me on LinkedIn and she called me up and she said, "You know what, Leslie? I want to tell you something. I'm sending you my book to read, but here's the deal. When you go through tragedy, like we have, you get two choices in life. Two. You can either stay stuck in your story or you can stand on your story." I knew within the first 24 hours of Austin's death that we were not going to be silent. We knew if there was any part of our story that we could share and help other families, help other young people, help young men, then we were going to step out on a leap of faith and tell our story. We just actually had no idea back then what a big platform we would be given. Right after Austin's death, I'm a woman of faith, and I realize that we represent a lot of beliefs in here, but stick with me here. Right after Austin's death, I was pretty angry at God, I'll be honest with you. I was wrestling with a lot of things with my faith. I was up one night in the middle of the night just trying to talk to him and remember Austin, and I couldn't sleep, and so I opened up my Bible, and I am not a biblical scholar. But I literally opened up my Bible just on the ground to Genesis 50:20, which says, "You intended to harm me, but God used this for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Over the past 7 years, I've received hundreds of emails, DMs, text messages, phone calls from families, from moms, from teens, from dads, who have thanked me, who have told me either they or someone they loved were suicidal, and then they came to hear our story. They had either tried to harm themselves, they were thinking about harming themselves, but once they heard our story, which I go to in much greater depth in a longer keynote, something made them change their mind. Something made them get brave enough to ask for help and say, "I can't do this by myself. I need to talk to somebody." So I know that our story has power, and I know this is what I'm meant to do with my life. So you might just say this Chapel Talk has been 7 years in the making. Because I've come back to Wabash to share the rest of our story with you, because my new title is not Survivor of Suicide Loss anymore. My new title is Surthriver of Suicide Loss. Losing Austin has set me on a path to try and understand young men's mental health. And even though I've shared our story all over the world now, I'm still amazed that it resonates with people everywhere. Because here's the thing: stress, anxiety, depression, mental health challenges speak a universal language, no matter where you live. So last summer, a journalist from the BBC contacted me. He said, "Hey, Leslie, I saw your 7-minute YouTube video, and we're planning this thing over here in England. Do I have any British brothers in here today? Anybody from England?" Yes. Well, we call it the Baton of Hope, but of course, my British friends call it the Baton of Hope. And he said, "I want to know if you would allow us to use your story for our website." So honored. If you look up the Baton of Hope UK and scroll down through stories, you'll see Austin's story. If you would have told me that I would have over 44,000 followers on LinkedIn by writing a daily mental health post, I would never believe you. Once again, depression, anxiety, and stories touch lives. Because that's all I'm doing. I'm just sharing stories. But here's what my son Austin would have gotten such a kick out of. He would have been like, "No way, Mom. If you would have told me that I am doing 2 presentations to the United States Pentagon next week, I would have never believed you. The following day, I will be speaking to McAfee software employees in the US, the UK, India, Japan, and Australia. And then the last week of September, I'm going to fly up to West Point and hang out with those cadets for the week. I've got a thing or two to talk about high achievers. High achievers in here, let me just tell you something. High achievers, high stress, high risk. You with me? Okay, so now I'm about to get up in your business this morning. What does it look like for you here this morning? All of you sitting here. None of you knew Austin and Evan, I don't believe, and maybe some of you are hearing their stories for the first time this morning. But here's the truth. They were not the last suicides here. You have had suicides from your student body since then. That's why I'm here. No more suicides on the campus of Wabash or with Wabash boys. You hear me? That's why I've come back 7 years later. Because I don't want our story to ever become your story. Everyone walking in here this morning, whether you were hanging out there, eating donuts, wherever you came from, every one of you is dealing with something this morning. We all are. Maybe it's a relationship issue, like it was with my son. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Maybe one of your classes is just a lot harder than you thought it was going to be, and you need it to graduate. You're not doing well. Maybe something's going on with one of your roommates or fraternity brother. You're dealing with something, but you don't want anybody to know about it, right? Wabash always fights. I got this. Grit it out. Man up. The man up mentality is killing our young men, killing them. I'm about to give you some data. You can't stuff it. I call that your invisible backpack. But the problem is it's not that invisible. That backpack can only hold so much before it starts spilling out sideways. You know what that looks like? Drinking a little too much on the weekend, missing classes, just a lot of things. Perfectionism, okay? Here comes your data. It's pretty shocking, and it's recent. According to the CDC, men account for 79% of all suicides in our country. You're 4 times more likely to end your life than young women are, and globally, you're twice as likely to die by your own hand. Now, I'm going to throw something else in there on top of you this morning. Let's talk about your generation, all right? I speak to Gen Zers all day, every day. You were born, all of you in here, I'm assuming were born between 1997 and 2012. So let's look at what the CDC says about that. Specifically, your age. 63% of young adults between 18 to 25, that's all you guys in here, that's all you Wabash brothers. You're currently experiencing significant symptoms of depression. We're going to talk about what it looks like in men, because remember, you got that invisible backpack. You got it stuffed. Nobody knows. But here's one that recently came out in May through our Surgeon General's office. We're going to talk about loneliness. Research also tells us that 65% of your age group report feeling lonely sometimes or all the time. And 19% of you report having no close friends. So I know you're like, hey, Leslie, I got my Wabash brothers. I'm not lonely. You can be in a crowded chapel and feel lonely. Loneliness is not about being surrounded by people. Loneliness is about feeling that no one cares. You're not seen and you're not connected with people. Stick with me. We're going to talk more about that. So that's the big deal about loneliness, right? Let's see what the Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, has to say. He defines loneliness as a common feeling. So the first thing I want to tell you is if you're in here and you're feeling lonely this morning, it's not unusual, okay? It's not unusual. It's common. He says it's like hunger or thirst. It's a feeling that our body sends us when we're missing something. We need something. Yeah, we do. We need each other. We need connection. But here's what he says. He goes on to tell us physically how hard it is on our body. Do you know that loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day for your body? And it has terrible impact on your mental health. So there you have it, straight from the Surgeon General's mouth, not mine. Let me recap for you. Gen Z self-reports. You self-report as the loneliest generation ever. Think about that for a minute. I want you to think about that. You are the most digitally connected, yet you're the loneliest generation ever. These things here, we're going to talk about those in a minute. They're not connection. They're disconnection. 7 out of 10 of you say you'd rather communicate digitally than in person. And 62% of you say you'd rather leave home without your wallet than your phone. Let me tell you another little story about leaving home without my phone. This spring, I had to go get my car serviced, and my dealership is about 15 minutes from my house. I was running a little early that morning, so I was almost there, and I looked down, and I realized I didn't have my phone with me, and I thought, I'm going to turn around and go get it. I thought, no, I'm not. I'm going to practice what I preach. I do not need my phone this morning. So I pull into the dealership, and the first thing I notice is it's kind of chaos. There's construction, there's cones up, there's barricades back into the service department, and everybody in there is complaining and griping and moaning. And I finally get back into the service department, and I can see I'm looking at the service desk and the guys behind the service desk, especially the service manager. I know him because I take my car in there a lot. It's a bad morning, and it's only 8 o'clock. Tempers are short. So I go back into the lounge to wait on my car, and about 20 minutes later, he comes back to get me. And I put my hand on touch his arm, and I said, hey, Neil, buddy, if the worst problem these people have today is a little bit of construction, give them my cell number. Tell them to call me. I'll be really happy to tell them what a bad day really looks like. He kind of looks at me, and I said, you see, Neil, I said, we lost our son 7 years ago to suicide. So I don't really sweat the small stuff. Construction, delays, small stuff. Neil was a tall guy. He kind of stopped. He looked at me. Me too, Leslie. I'm in your club. I lost my dad 10 years ago to suicide. Neil and I stood there for about another 5 minutes, and we talked. He told me his dad had been in Vietnam. He had been through a lot of PTSD. He never asked for help, and he ended up taking his life. It was just 10 years ago last week. I went to see my buddy Neil on the 10-year anniversary of his dad's death. We talked for a few minutes, and then I was getting ready to get my car, and Neil said, can I give you a hug, Leslie? I said, you sure can. Later on that evening, I looked at my phone, and I had a message in there, and it was from Neil's mom. She said, I have no idea what you said today to my son, but he never talks about his dad. He never opens up to anybody. So I want to thank you for whatever it was that you said that connected with him. You know why I connected with him? Because I forgot this stupid thing at home. If I would have had it with my head down, do you know what I saw when I came on the campus of Wabash today? Let me show you what I saw. Let me ask you a question. How many Neils on Wabash campus are you walking by because you're looking at a TikTok video on your phone? You cannot see people's pain when your heads are down. We have to look up. We are in a mental health crisis. You just heard the data, 79%. You're on a small all-male campus, and you have had multiple suicides here. You guys got to look up and get your heads out of your phones. I'm sorry, I'm pretty passionate about that topic, but we're not finished with it. Because those conversations can only happen when we're looking up. We don't notice. I wouldn't have noticed everything going on that morning. How many of you know that the Mental Health Concerns Committee here on campus was formed after Austin's suicide. Now, I know that COVID messed some things up here on campus, and I understand that. But Austin would have loved that. He would have loved that. What a legacy to try to help his Wabash brothers with their mental health, especially his little Wabash brothers. You know, you have a lot of clubs here. I went on the website, so I was getting ready for the talk, and I looked it up. I don't know if they're all active, but you actually have 54 clubs listed on the website. And I don't really care what the clubs do or what they're about. That doesn't matter to me. What I care about is showing up for each other, putting the phone down, having conversations. It's the connection in those clubs that I care about. The relationships in those clubs are what are going to help your mental health. A TikTok video is not going to do anything for anyone's mental health, yours or anyone else's. What matters is the connection that you form with your Wabash brothers while you're here. And that's how we're going to turn this mental health crisis around in our world and on this campus, one conversation at a time. Why is it so important? Now we're going to talk about hope, clinically what that means. Connection creates hope, and hope saves lives. This is what I talk to when I go on big army bases with soldiers. I want to tell you what the definition of hope is. It's expectancy. It's expecting to go to the game with your buddies this weekend. It's expecting to go out for burgers tonight. You're looking forward to something happening. Now, here's the deal about hope. When you have that expectancy, it releases these good endorphins in your brain because you're looking forward to seeing somebody. You're looking forward to doing something. And when those endorphins get released, those good chemicals in our brain, it calms our stress level down, which gives us the ability to think more clearly and make better choices than the one that Austin or Evan made. I often say, and I teach a lot about the brain, I speak in high schools, that I'm not sure about Evan, but Austin had an amygdala hijack. What does that mean? The back of his brain, his fight or flight, those big emotions, they got stuck. He couldn't reason his way into the next moment and see that things were going to get better, things were going to change. He couldn't think clearly. He lost hope. So that's why we need to keep hope in our lives. Hope helps us think clearly. Hope comes from connection, and hope saves lives. There is clinical research, you can look it up, that backs up what I'm saying, and I've been saying this since the day Austin died. So if you only remember one thing I say here today, stay with me. It might be a little shocking what I'm about to say, but here it is. No one ever dies of suicide. They don't. Their backstories are different. What leads up to that moment is different. Austin and Evan's stories were very, very different. The manner of death is suicide. The cause of death, loss of hope in a single moment when they couldn't see to the next moment when things were going to get better. Did you know that we can live 40 days without food and water? We can live 3 days without food. We can live 3 days without water, and we can live 8 minutes without air, but only 1 split second without hope. So I don't know all your stories, all of you that have come in here this morning, and I'm so glad to see all your beautiful faces. I love this campus. But here's what I want to do. I want to ask you something. What's in your invisible backpack this morning? What are you carrying around that you don't want anybody to know about? You got it stuffed back there. You got it, right? When you get brave enough to trust one of your Wabash brothers and get something out of that backpack, that's the start, that's connection, and that's the start of hope, expecting things to get better. So I want to share one last story with you before I close this morning. This past March, I was invited to be the speaker at the Wabash Indianapolis Men's Club. These are your alumni. They are successful men. They have crushed it in life. The man of the morning was an orthopedic surgeon. They're attorneys, doctors. Guess what? That doesn't matter. Every one of those men are still carrying around invisible backpacks. They're just older, and they've been carrying that weight a lot longer in life. So I explained the concept to them of the invisible backpack as it relates to men's mental health. We talked about how important it is for them, especially in their careers, to find a tribe of people that they can trust with their mental health, that they can take something out of that backpack. And I gave them a throwdown challenge. I asked them to take one thing out of their invisible backpack that morning. There were about 350 of them there. I said, do not leave this breakfast until you get with a Wabash alum, a Wabash brother, and I want you to lighten your load. I want you to say, hey, man, I've never told anybody this, but I need to tell you something. Okay? So after I finish speaking, there's usually people that come up and talk to me, and there were several that morning. And as the crowd was clearing out, I noticed these two men were standing off in the corner. They kind of waited till everybody left, and then they made their way up to me. They really took me up on the challenge. Now, they'd known each other for about 20 years, went to Wabash here together. First one turned to his Wabash brother and said, I never talk about this, but when I was 10 years old, my dad took his life. It gets better. His buddy, his friend from Wabash of many years, said, wow, man, I am so sorry because I know how that feels. Because I never told anybody this, but when I was 7 years old, my dad took his life. Can you even imagine? Can you even imagine how their backpacks got lightened that morning? And that friendship took a whole nother level of depth. I told them if there was an award that morning for lightening the backpack, I would have given it to those two. Because they connected through their loss. And remember, connection creates hope, and hope changes lives. So here it goes. I got a couple throwdown challenges for you Wabash men this morning. What are you carrying around in your invisible backpack? Every one of you sitting in here, you're all dealing with something. You think you're handling it, but you got it stuffed back there. You talk about the strength of your brotherhood all the time here, so why not trust that brotherhood? Why not find somebody? So here's my challenge. It's Thursday. Before the weekend, before tomorrow, be great if you did it today, I want you to find a Wabash brother. Find somebody. And if you think of somebody that doesn't have anybody, you go to them. And you go, hey, man, I got to share something with you. And then you say, what's in your backpack? Let's talk. Because you don't need to be a licensed clinical therapist to save a life. You need to just pull up a chair, put your phone down, look into somebody's eyes, and give them your time. Give them your time. You got to turn off your phone, guys. Second challenge. And I want you guys, not everybody's in here this morning, I realize this, but I'm giving you a Wabash challenge, and I know how Wabash men love challenges. I want you to really spend the month of September, World Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month. Sunday is World Suicide Prevention and Awareness Day, which will mark the 7-year anniversary of the last time I've heard the sound of my son's voice. And where's Mary Hansen? Mary is up there, Evan's mom, so everybody give her a hug this morning. She drove from Indianapolis, okay? She will mark 5 years without Evan on Sunday. And I want you to show up on Saturday morning. We have a 5K here in memory of our boys. We are raising money for Austin Scholarship. We've given 6 college scholarships away. We have the only college scholarship in our county that's earmarked for someone going in the mental health field. Okay, so I'm asking you to do 2 things. I'm asking you to lighten your backpack, find a brother, talk. Don't stuff it, because you don't want it to come out sideways. And listen, you might think you're handling it, but men's depression looks different. It looks like anger. It looks like irritation. You got a short fuse. It looks like drinking too much on the weekend. It looks different. So you're not really hiding it. And you're here for such a short time in this amazing place. You want to have those deep relationships. Remember, connection leads to hope, and hope saves lives. So those are my 2 challenges for you, Wabash. And I know Wabash always fights, and brothers, don't let brothers suffer in silence. Connect with a brother before the weekend, because it only takes 1 second of hope to have no more suicides on Wabash College campus. Thank you for letting me share a story with you this morning.